So hello everybody, my name is Lamont Satchel Jr. I am a college freshman attending Morehouse College down in Atlanta. And today I will be your moderator for this event. It's funny because my first day of class was actually today, so I think this is a great opportunity and conversation to start around, the school year, what it's going to look like for a lot of school districts around the country, coming into this new reality that we've been facing for the past year and so. And so I guess I can kick it off with the first question, as just as an icebreaker for all the attendees. What's your biggest hope for this school year? And again, you can unmute and give your response, or if you're comfortable, you can also put it in the chat, whichever works best for you.
Well, all right then. I think I'll get started right off. My name is Willyne Smith. I'm a senior attending Renaissance High School, 17 years old. And I would say my biggest hope for the upcoming school year is just like to proceed as much as we can without interruption, really just do the best that we can given the current circumstances. But yeah, thank you.
I can go ahead and answer. Hi, my name is Mosammad Jahan. I'm also a rising senior this year at Benjamin Carson High School of Science and Medicine. I guess as an upcoming senior, I'm obviously excited for senior year activities, but in my school specifically, we participate in externships as seniors, so I'm really looking forward to that.
I'll go next. My name is Mathias Neloms. I'm going to 8th grade. I'll be attending Charlotte Mason Academy. And something that I'm looking forward to this upcoming school year is just seeing my friends in person, just learning in person again. So that's something I'm looking forward to.
All right, so I guess we'll start engaging with our panelists and asking some questions to kind of get this conversation started. Um, So I guess the first question would be, during the pandemic, we saw, or during last year, during the pandemic, we saw that a lot of school districts had transferred to virtual learning, and that also did bring a issue and a concern of the digital divide and technology within certain school districts. And so the question I would like to pose to some of the panelists are, how do you think schools have adopted new technology during the pandemic? And do you think content and technology is modernizing with the times, or do you think it's out of touch?
I feel like our schools were never really designed to be fully remote, and it was designed to be like hands-on experimental learning. So in the short time that they had, I feel like they did a great job adapting, at least in my school district. I think so.
Matthias, do you
Um,
have any? Oh, I'm sorry.
I know you're good.
Mm.
I would say I'm probably coming from like the opposite side. I think our school districts, I go to Detroit Public Schools, I think they did the best that they could given the circumstances and how last minute everything was, of course. But I also think that it really highlighted how I guess outdated our current like educational curriculum and just like how everything works regarding that, how outdated it is because they really kind of rushed to put it together. It was kind of like public school but literally online, all the limitations of public school, all the rules and regulations of public school, but not really put together to fit the online space, but just literally online, I would say.
I think schools using technology. I think it was rushed. They rushed to get students technology and didn't really have a plan for how school was going to be operated during a virtual school year. So I think a lot of it is just rushed and put together, and that's why you saw students maybe talking skipping classes because it was made the way it was set up was not something that interests students.
Well, no, I think that those are all great points. I think that, me graduating, but me seeing that transition last year, my senior year, I think it was a big adjustment for a lot of school districts. I think one of the biggest things that we heard was like digital divide, and that term, it has to be used very carefully, but I think that a lot of, especially urban school districts, face that situation where they were already, underperforming when it came to funding for certain things. And so, as you saw when the pandemic happened, and we had to abruptly transition to virtual learning, uh, or virtual learning, that we had to make that adjustment. And it took a while for a lot of public schools, especially in the urban communities, to really kind of hop on the bandwagon because they didn't have those resources or even funding at their fingertips prior to the shutdown. But I do understand. I'm glad that we all put our input in that. Does anyone else have anything before we move on? Any other closing thoughts? All right, so I guess we'll move on to the next question. So last year, and even actually now, we have a lot of situations in the media and the news that have focused on students and learning loss over the pandemic. And so I wanted to get your thoughts, panelists, on your reaction to the concept and meaning of learning loss, and if you have any personal stories regarding this term.
I think learning loss is it's not really a loss. It just maybe students weren't progressing as much as schools have seen in past years in in-person learning. So I don't really think it was a loss to learn. I think it was maybe not much of a progression in learning. And personal stories I have, like 'cause my dad's a school teacher, so every day I would listen to him while he was talking to students. Um, I would see students maybe weren't paying attention in classes because it was either boring or they didn't enjoy the lesson topic. So it was not really a loss. It's not a progression of learning.
To add upon that, I definitely see that that was the case, honestly. For me, it was more like, especially when the pandemic first started, March of 2020, that was in like the middle of the year. And then we didn't have school at all for the rest of the year. And then we're just supposed to return the next school year as though everything was normal. So when you have a gap, but you don't like go and make up for it, then you just continue onwards with this entire gap in your knowledge. I know people who, for me, when the pandemic started, I was a sophomore in high school. So who literally never passed geometry, but when we got to junior year, it was time to do algebra 2 or pre-calc, and like they just don't know geometry. Like they don't know geometry math because we never went back to it. We never covered it again. It was just like pushing forward as far as we could, ignoring like all the things that needed to be accounted for, basically.
I feel like in some ways, maybe I have suffered from learning loss, but on the other hand, like how can you really determine that? But schools use standardized testing, which I don't believe is very accurate this year because student really can be measured on like an average scale, especially this year, because we have been thrown into completely different learning environments. So how can you really determine that? To say like how well standardized curriculum is supposed to like prepare us for the future, we learned like in this year we have learned about real world challenges and the long-term experiences, long-term like consequences this year, and how can anything taught in a textbooks or to say like outdated textbooks really compare to the experiences we have had in the past year as students. I feel like the curriculum should be like taught should adapt to the current events instead.
Yeah, I definitely understand. And I think the unique position that I'm in is, going into my senior year with the pandemic, one of the biggest things that I was worried about was if I was going to be prepared for college level classes with that cut in instruction during the beginning of the pandemic. And that was one of the things that really worried me. Especially for a lot of college institutions that said that they were kind of continuing that pace of, you have to come in on what you know, and if you don't, you have to study harder. Thank God a lot of schools closer to when application time was in and when people were limited, we had the opportunity to kind of meet them where they're at, understanding that a lot of instruction was lost. Even if you were in school, either in person, hybrid, or strictly online, the engagement was completely different. There was so many external factors that prevented people from truly harnessing and focusing on their education. So I think that it was a unique position, especially for the class of 2021, going into their freshman year of college, understanding or battling with that notion that, I may be behind in college math, or I may be behind in those courses or subjects that were really necessary during the pandemic. But no, I appreciate all the panelists' input, and I do agree with every perspective. Sorry, quite Willie.
Yeah, I really want to add upon that. Sorry, don't want to extend the question time. I
It's
think my
fine.
point is exactly just that. Do we hold students responsible for education missed in school? Because I mean, a student isn't really responsible for getting their own education. You go to school and the teachers kind of provide that for you. It's your responsibility to be there to receive it. But if school is literally closed and you can't go there because we're in the middle of a pandemic, and then you don't learn the material that you're supposed to learn in that period of time, and then when we're like past that point, they just move on and pretend that it never really happened. Does that fall upon the shoulders of students? Are they just expected to just like literally become their own educators, look for that material, that curriculum? And if so, like, would we like provide them the resources to make that possible? Is that even like feasible for most students? I think those are really important questions to think of.
I completely agree. Any other panelists have any closing remarks or input? All right. So I guess we'll move on to the question. I think this is my favorite question, one of my favorite questions, directed to the panelists. What do you think schools should prioritize this year and beyond? What do you hope schools will keep doing, and what do you hope schools will stop doing? So in that instance, think about schedules, think about academic courses, think about the time of instruction in school, either virtual, hybrid, or in person. What are some of the things that you wish would continue that came out of the pandemic, and what are some of the things that you wish that maybe stopped during the pandemic that should just completely just go away?
I think something that schools should prioritize is students' mental health. So like it's because it's been numerous kids like me who have lost somebody during the pandemic. Maybe they've been sick or they know somebody who's been sick and they've is still affecting them. And I just think schools should focus on that. They should also focus on maybe meeting students where they are in learning. So whatever their whatever their level of learning is right now, schools should focus on meeting students at that point.
Firstly, I hope schools prioritize students and staff safety, especially going back to school this year. And as Matthias mentioned, like meeting where students are at this point in their learning. And as I mentioned before, improving the curriculums in the upcoming school year.
I definitely agree with both of those points. I think also, I think schools should really prioritize flexibility. I think there is a sort of not dismissal, but very much playing down the current circumstances of our situation. And there are going to be days where people can't come into school, or there are going to be days where people might need to do school from a remote location, or there are just going to be days where like just something comes up. And it's not necessarily to promote like being not disciplined or not sticking to a strict schedule. But like, the fact of the matter is we are in unprecedented times. Like things are not normal. So if school went back to completely 100% pre-COVID, come in, stay on campus till like 3:30, 100%, strict like that, I don't think that would be beneficial to a lot of students.
Yeah, I fully agree. And that was one of the things that during the school year, a lot of students, not only at Cass, but at other high schools and even middle schools, really advocated for, was making sure that our scheduling was uh, adapted and was altered. I think one of the things that I found and a lot of my other colleagues in high school found was that the high school schedule or the schedule in general from going to 8 to 3:30 was not really as effective as people thought it would be. And so once the pandemic happened and once we got into the fall and we were told that we would have that same schedule virtually, it was just that whole transition was just not something that we were able or willing to do. And so I think one of the things that a lot of school and even school districts around the country really took note was asynchronous and synchronous learning, and also the real amount of hours it takes for instruction, right? I think that just saying from 8 to 3:30 is effective instruction time and an effective school day is just unrealistic. And I think that's one of the things that I pray does not come back this upcoming school year, that they just transition us back to, or the students back to 8 to 3, because I don't think it's effective. I think that our schedule should mimic realistic schedules. It should mimic realistic lifestyles. And the sad reality is that even though last year was horrible and we did face a lot of uncertainty, it's still that way, especially with the Delta variant right now. And so we find ourselves still in this space where we would think by then we would have everything back to normal, everything would be good, but we're still in this confusion of, okay, if the Delta variant does do something to our society, how do we bounce back? Do we go back to those same issues of feisty school board meetings and school administration and students not being on the same page? Or do we learn from what we did last year, right? Do we learn from what we did last year and start engaging with students and people that actually are affected by this and put them in positions where they can really affect change? I know when you had some input. Go ahead.
I also think it's a matter of safety, to be honest. I really don't think, like, especially for my school, our DPS district, they want us to just all come back and just wear masks every day. But it's going to be, I know there's at least 1,200 people on my school campus, and we only have two lunches. So, like, imagine a cafeteria split into, so 600 students to like, all the cafeteria tables. It just doesn't sound realistic. So I feel like either there would be some days where like maybe half the students are like asynchronous learning or learning remotely from home, and then some students come on campus and we kind of rotate like that, or maybe shorten the day so we would spend less time on campus cramped together with a lot of people. But it seems as now it's just literally going to go like return back to what it was in 2019. And it just doesn't seem that safe. Like it just it does not seem effective, efficient. And there's gonna be 1,200 people on campus all day long, like 7 hours. I don't know, but if I was in that meeting, I would have definitely suggested something different.
Yes, I have the same sentiments. Yes. Any other closing remarks on this question from the panelists? All right. I guess we can move on to the next question. So, I think one of the things that a lot of us, especially students, have really talked about was mental health. I know there's been a huge conversation in education since the past year, and I guess that we can kind of lead into this. So, how did you practice wellness and mental health during the pandemic, and how can schools support student mental health and wellness?
I practiced self care and mental wellness during the pandemic by uh, going to the park, maybe meeting up with some friends if possible, playing baseball. That's something I started doing. I really enjoyed that. Just doing stuff I enjoy. Um, so that's something that I think everybody should do. Just do things they enjoy, because that's a very good wellness technique.
In my school specifically, we had a therapist, and we focused on different topics each month. We had like sessions for an hour, like every month. I feel like that was really effective. I think other schools should maybe implement that too, and maybe even create like to have a one-on-one sessions with students and therapists. Like overall, just have like resources for mental health available in school.
I think a lot of the mental health crises that occurred over the course of this pandemic were largely related to our social isolation. So I think we should invest in basically talking to each other more. I think that was kind of inherent in being um, actually in campus because they're like around hundreds of people at all times. But mostly in online classes, you kind of like shut up, you like were muted, turned off your camera, you let the teachers like say the lesson for like 20 minutes, 30, and like you logged off and that was it. And I found that that was just like really alienating and isolating. Like it really turned school into just not fun at all, not even barely tolerable, to be honest. Like it was very alienating and isolating. So I feel like if we do go back to things like that, we should probably invest in taking some time at the school day to just talk, just like socialize with each other, talk with each other, talk about our feelings. I like talking to my teachers after school, asking them about their days. Teachers have feelings too, you guys. Like I know my teachers in particular, some lost family members over the course of this pandemic. Like a lot were going through hard times, so I was trying to check in on them, and that made me feel better about my situation too.
Yes, all great responses, and I share my sentiments with all three of you guys. I feel the exact same way. Um, I think that at some point I've heard a lot of conversations, especially in school, both middle and high school, of adults, saying, "What do you have to be stressed for? You're a kid," And I think one of the biggest walls we have to break down is understanding what mental health and self care looks like in a school setting and outside school setting. I think that we often tell ourselves, and even adults, we often tell ourselves, what stays at home, you have to keep that at home. And when you come to work and when you come to school, you have to put it to the side. But the reality is you can't. That's the reality. When if you have a messed up morning or you have a bad morning or something, ticks you off, you can't just turn on a switch in your head and walk into the school building or walk into work and say it's all gone, right? And so I think that one of the biggest things that we should do, not only as engaging school leaders and administrators and teachers, but also students, is understanding and breaking down that barrier and redefining what it means to address and assess mental health, right? So where we can also effectively catch it right before it gets worse or before it leads to inevitable things, but also making sure that we nurture whatever either student or teacher or school administrator or employee situation that has to be going on. So I think that's definitely a conversation that needs to be had, and I think that's definitely a policy that should be put in place. Um, but yeah, but no, I fully understand the sentiments of that. I'm glad that everyone was able to engage with that conversation. Um, One of the questions that really resonated with me and really I think will get the panelists thinking is, what are the biggest lessons you learned, and what are the ways that you thrived during the school year in the pandemic? What was challenging, and what was more of your successful moments during the pandemic with education?
I think one thing we all learned was to appreciate small things. So in the upcoming school year, I don't think we necessarily need social gatherings or things like that to enjoy their school year, but we can appreciate like classroom areas and being in the same classroom as peers and sharing our thoughts and ideas. Overall, just a learning environment with others is something that I'm really looking forward to.
Something that I learned during the virtual school year was to just value every day you wake up because it's not promised. Also, to value your family because luckily for me, that all my uh, main family members or people and in my extended family, we didn't really have any deaths. So that was something that I really value and was grateful for. Also, it's just that sometimes you have to be independent with your work. You can't always ask for help because it may not be there. So sometimes you may have to figure out for yourself how to do something. So those are things that I learned during the pandemic.
I think a struggle I definitely had at the beginning of the pandemic wasn't necessarily like discipline regarding my schoolwork because I am a serious student. But I noticed that a lot of teachers themselves, our instructors weren't actually really well versed with technology and didn't really even know how to work like Zoom or Teams themselves. So sometimes there will be kind of a gap in the things that we're supposed to be learning because I mean, how can you learn something when your teacher like isn't actually like properly communicating it or teaching it to you? So there were times where you really had to like pick up your own weight, go on your own time, study a little bit more, give yourself some more time to really get into a topic or a subject because it just wasn't really a conducive learning environment. It wasn't the best place to just like leave the responsibility of education 100% up to your teacher. So I think that would be a struggle. But in terms of something I really came to appreciate, I just really appreciated my friends and my friendships and just, really being kind to people. Maybe perhaps a little like cliche, but just like really appreciating the little things and just being empathetic with people, understanding their situation.
All right. Any closing remarks for the panelists before we move on? All right. So we're going to kind of transition the conversation to something that I think is very important. So partnerships and reimagining school, I think, was a conversation that we kind of touched on a little bit in a few minutes ago when we asked those conversations around, what are some of the things that we wish stayed away or went away during the pandemic, and some of the things that were adopted during the pandemic that we wish become permanent policy and permanent rule. And so I think one of the questions that I really speak to this is how can schools partner with students to reimagine education, and what does that look like? Whether that's councils, whether that's think tanks, whether that's conversations with school leaders, weekly or monthly. What does that look like, and what do you think would be most effective?
So I think that schools should partner. A way that schools partner with students is giving them leadership roles in the school. Because I was in a co-op, a homeschool co-op, and me and some of my friends, we started a youth council where we went around the co-op and saw what was working and what wasn't working, and we would try to find solutions for that benefited everyone. We would also have something called community time, and that was when we would check on everyone. We would have maybe like a icebreaker game. Everybody would have to say how they were feeling that day. So that's something I think that schools should do because that's very effective.
I definitely agree.
Yeah, that's something I was gonna say too. Like giving leadership roles to students, and maybe even have like monthly consults or like meetings with student leaders and other administrators from the school, and actually listen to students opinions and visions of their learning environment, and not just listen but actually incorporate their ideas. And I think a last year at our school we had like meetings like that, but I don't think they actually followed through any of the ideas we had. They gave us time to listen to us, but I don't think they actually incorporated any of the things. So actually, um, they I think school leaders should actually listen to us, not just listen, actually incorporate things that we are saying.
I really agree with that point, honestly. It's just about keeping the thoughts and opinions of the people who are actually going to be attending school and going through the situation, keeping those in mind. Personally, even if it's not a like student representation of like maybe a decision panel or people actually like voting on policies that are going to happen, I think there should just be a general stride towards accommodation because sometimes if the majority of students are going to be able to do this one thing, like be majority of students be able to come onto campus, but does that mean like remote learning as a total is going to like go away, and all the students who can't come onto campus, are they just going to like not go to school? Things like that. I think there should just generally be like options, you know, sometimes depending on just like basic things, really. It doesn't have to just like think of something in your mind, anything that's like, okay, some students are going to be able to do this, some won't. Who do we prioritize? Who do we put first? I don't like that at all. There are always going to be students who are in different circumstances. I just think we should just try to like accommodate them all. So yeah.
I definitely agree. I think one of the main points that I think everyone touched on was making sure that we put students, and Matthias, I think he said it best, make sure we put students in leadership roles. And kind of just to take that a little further, and if you would like to expound on this as well, not only putting them in the roles, but making sure that you listen to them. A lot of situations, especially in school districts, they give these councils, they give these platforms and think tanks and congregations to where you're able to come together and speak. But you know, and I think for all the students on the call, the panelists, we've ran into situations where we're told, you know, you're in control, your thoughts and perspectives are valued, but then when we list it, it's either not right, it's either inaccurate, or it just won't be implemented. It's not realistic. And so I think more importantly, and I think for a lot of, if we have administrators on the call, if we have teachers on the call, if we have sponsors of clubs on the call, I think the biggest thing that you can do in the position that you're in within your school district, within your school, and within the relationships that you have with your students is make sure you cultivate that environment to where they're able to express how they feel, their perspective, and actually have, you know, actually materialize on it once they say it. I think that oftentimes, sometimes I've always felt this way in the school system, that adults forget that everything they do eventually affects us. We're, as students, we're at the bottom in the sense of the organizational structure. And so everything that happens at the top, it will trickle down to us. And so when we're not in those spaces to be able to say, I don't think this is right, or this is not the right turn, or I think we should, you know, maybe go this way or go this way, or set this policy, and it's not listened to, eventually it affects the student and our education. So I think that's something important, not only for everyone on the, not for only for the panelists, but also for the attendees that are in these situations. So I guess we'll move on to the next question. And also, just a countdown, we're getting closer to the time for the Q&A, so please have your questions ready. And please also make sure that you come off mute and engage with us when we do, if you have any questions for the panelists or just to engage in conversation. I guess the next question, and this is also a thing that has really been in the news, especially down here in the South. What subjects and topics do you wish that you could learn in school? And you can also tie this back to, you know, critical race theory, some of the things that have been in conversation in a lot of schools now. And for the teachers on the call specifically, or instructors, you can also, once we have Q&A, you can also engage with that conversation of what you think should be taught in your classrooms or your school district.
I'm something that I want to learn when I return to school is history, like the history of Africa or the history of other countries, because once you know your history, you can move forward. It's a saying, it's an ancient African saying of saying knowing your past helps you value your future. So and they use a Sankofa bird. It's a bird that can like, it's a picture of a Sankofa bird, which is a bird in Africa, and it's looking back to get something off its back so it can move forward. So that's a great thing, something that schools can teach, because not only do you know your history, you also know other people's history. So that way, if you want to just knowing history. So I think that is something that schools really need to focus on.
Um, I think I'm fortunate because I think my school actually has robust humanities courses. I mean, I know personally this year, I think I'm taking psychology and sociology. which do interest me a lot. So I'm pretty happy about that. I'm not necessarily sure if we need to add a specific course, but I do think our curriculum in general should really promote critical thinking and active engagement. What I notice is that a lot of times teachers are either reading straight from a textbook or just lecturing you, and most people just sit there bored the entire time, don't engage. They take the notes, they remember it for the tests, and it's gone, it's out of their brain. So I think there needs to be a lot of um, movement to just really get students to care. And a lot of things that we do learn in school, while not necessarily going towards your active career path, do like influence the type of person you become, because you're being shaped with more knowledge and basically just more information to make decisions in the future. And I think that's very important that that gets nurtured in the right way.
I feel like at one point this has been brought up everywhere, but I still wish we had some kind of financial literacy classes where they would like teach us basics of money management. And to say more, like since I'm an upcoming senior, there's a lot of things with college application stuff, and I don't really have one at home to walk me through that. So I feel like if there was like a teacher or like a school time where someone would walk us through that process, it would take away a lot of our stress, and it would be great to rely on something like that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And Masad, I think that that was a beautiful point about financial literacy. I think that was a great point. And I think that when you do graduating into college, that's definitely something that you want to look into. And even if it's not taught in your school, engage with it in your private and personal life, because it is something that I never understood as I grew up. And mind you, I'm not 40 or anything, but I'm still getting there. I'm still understanding everything. But it is shocking that a lot of the stuff that I did learn in high school is very irrelevant now. It took me my first day of class to realize that a lot of the instruction that I had in high school is so irrelevant to real world and realistic issues that we face today. I could never understand why, we would know everything about chemistry, we would know everything about physics, but we don't know anything about filing taxes. We know nothing about money management. We know nothing about savings and investments and CODs and Roth IRAs, things that, will benefit us in the long run. We know nothing about. And so it's the harsh reality, especially for communities of color, we have to realize at a later point in life, and to the point where we've already done so much irreparable damage that we don't have the access to resources or the access to that financial stability to be able to do what we want. So I think that's definitely a conversation that should be had, and that's definitely a conversation that everyone should engage with their curriculum at their respective school districts. Is how can we make sure that we actually prepare students for the future, and what does the future look like in the modern 21st century? What does that future look like? So yeah, I think that's definitely a good thing. So it's 4:41. We were gonna engage and do our Q&A at 4:45, but I think I'm gonna push it up just a little bit. So I guess we can go ahead and go into our Q&A now. Just a little rules for the Q&A. You can come off of mute, and if you want, you can also engage with your camera on as well, but it's not required. And engage in conversation. You can also do a Q&A and ask the panelists any question that you wish. If you want to direct a certain question to the panelists, you can put that in the chat, or you can speak it when you come off mute, whichever works best for you. So now officially I'm opening up for Q&A again. Either you can put your question in the chat and direct it towards a specific panelist, or you can come off mute and ask your question and direct it to a specific panelist or the whole panel. Okay, not everyone at once. That's a lot of people. We have to. No. Well, I guess, okay, we do have a question in the chat. So this is to the panel. This is Teresa Youngblood. She says, how long do you anticipate the changes you propose to take place?
I expect them to happen as soon as possible. I'm on the President's Youth Council at the Skillman Foundation, And the Skillman Foundation does a lot of work within schools. And so being on that council, I expect the changes, because we've informed them of the changes that we want to happen. I expect them to happen as soon as possible, like like during the school year, maybe even before. I don't know.
I think that is a powerful answer. I pretty much agree. I think once we are in said positions of power, or at the very least have our like opinions voiced and heard, I don't really think it would be that hard to put them into place, because I mean, once you write something down and say this is now district policy, is district policy, and people just have to kind of get with the program in the same way that like those at the district and be like, okay, we're about to lengthen your school day, you get out at 3:30 now, or like the school dress code is now this. They can do it at a drop of a hat. I don't see why it can't be in the other direction.
Yes, I would hope it happened, like the changes we talked about. I hope it happens while I'm in school as a senior. And yeah, I really look forward to seeing the changes in the upcoming school year.
Lamont, while folks are thinking about other questions and waiting to come off of mute, I can go ahead and feed up a few questions that we've seen come in through the chat. And I'll just say good afternoon to everyone. My name is Lindsay Barrett with the Skillman Foundation. I'll just be helping to get all of your questions in, but definitely encourage folks to come off of mute. So we had a question come in from Naomi Khalil from DPS CD, and she made a couple of comments around how learning really happens all around us, inside of schools and outside of schools, and asked the question, how are we taking this time of reset to support youth development, a love of learning, and where excellence in school is a byproduct of that learning that happens both inside of the classroom and outside of the classroom. So any thoughts around that? Thinking about, your learning experiences outside of the classroom maybe, and how schools can incorporate some of those pieces.
So I think how schools can incorporate learning outside of school. During the pandemic, kids have probably had to do maybe more learning outside of school than actually in school. So I think maybe schools, instead of maybe like giving homework, they can give them maybe something they can do outside of school that the teacher doesn't have time to teach it, so they can learn about it and maybe come back and then show the teacher or whoever leading the class what they learned. So I think that's something they can use to incorporate that. Also think maybe just having learning outside of school, maybe putting more spotlight on that, because because when you get to college, that is something you're gonna have to do a lot of. You're gonna have to do learning for yourself outside of school.
Yes, and I'm the biggest testament to that. Yes, independent study is a very successful tool that you have to use. So, yes, I definitely.
I would like to add on. I think it just also comes back to like the idea of interactive learning and active student engagement. When you're very awake and engaged with the lesson in the classroom, I feel like it follows you outside the classroom. I remember specifically in my life having a few classes that I really very much cared about. This might have been like elementary science, but when I went into that classroom where I was engaged, the teacher, man, I forgot my teacher's name, but the teacher was making sure we're all paying attention and like the lesson was really sitting with us. When I went out, I'm like, hey, that's that thing that we learned in class, and you're making all the connections around you. I think that's the thing that happens just naturally when we learn things, but it also has to really be in line with your engagement and activity with it. So yeah.
May I ask a question? I was so interested to hear you guys talk about leadership roles in the schools and how that could affect change. I wonder, I've seen in the past that those that are really involved will then join these groups, and then they're the ones that join all the groups. I wonder how you think you could get everybody's voices heard amongst the school in those leadership roles.
I think after school activities, so something like that. So after school activity, you have maybe a time where students just discuss uh, what they want changed or something they want ended in the school. So that's something we can utilize. I also think just taking the time to talk to the students. That's something that's I've seen during the pandemic that's very effective. Just talking. So I think that's something that schools could do to make sure everybody's voice is heard.
And throughout the school year, we incorporated a lot of surveys. I think using surveys and things like that would be more efficient.
I'll go ahead and bring in another question from the chat. This question comes from Lamar. And the question is, what is the biggest misconception you believe adult leaders have with engaging youth leaders, and how can those practices be improved?
I think something that adults think when talking to kids, that's a stereotype, is that kids always need an adult to explain something to them, because that's not always the case. Uh, Kids can interpret stuff maybe better or just as well as adults. So I think that adults always thinking that kids need them to hold their hand through something. That's something that a lot of adults think and is wrong.
I feel like another misconception is that our ideas are too unrealistic. I feel like if there's a will, there's a way. None of our ideas are too unrealistic, and if they really try to do the things we want, I don't think it would be that hard as they make it sound.
I really agree with that. I personally think adults think that kids, when they argue for themselves, are arguing so things can be the most easy and lackadaisical as possible. I think, especially around whenever school got shortened to 8 to 1:30, a lot of teachers were complaining, oh, this is because we're lazy. Like, we just wanted to have a short school day, not even take into consideration how making that type of account for all the students in regards to their home situations, or just like the flexibility of remote learning, how that actually might be more efficient. But they were thinking, oh, we have like an altered grade system now, going to encourage students to be more lazy and not come to class. Oh, the school day has been shortened, going to encourage students to be lazy and not come to class. I think that adults think when children advocate for themselves, they're just advocating to have like the most fun and the least amount of rules, just so things can just be easy. But I think students have a self-interest that is just a little bit more complicated than that. And sometimes when we're actually really like making arguments or defending what should or shouldn't happen, it's in regard to how things can be improved overall.
If I can just slip this in real quick, I think another big misconception um, is that we don't know what's best for us. Students don't know what's best for students, and I think that's one of the issues that I've always had an issue with during the school year. Was I was constantly being told that's not right, or that's not what you need, or that's unrealistic, kind of like what everyone else is saying. And I think it just boils down to the simple rule of, if I'm the one in the desk, if I'm the one going from class to class, if I'm the one that's doing the homework, and if I'm the one that's engaging with my teachers, then I do know what's best in the classroom. The two most important people that know what's best in the classroom is the teacher and the student. That's it. And so I think that, when we engage with students, I think that's the biggest thing. Don't shoot them down, hear them out and understand and listen to them. Because at the end of the day, again, what you do affects us in the long run. So, yeah.
I think on that note, there's another question here that's connected to that encompasses a few comments that have come in the chat. There's a question from Louise that says, as a person who supports the professional development of teachers, I would like to understand from your point of view, what are the most important characteristics of an ideal teacher? It's related to some other questions around what worked well that you would like teachers to continue doing, and how to bridge that technology gap potentially too.
I think something that makes a teacher that everybody enjoys and that is very effective is they listen to students. They don't just drone on and on and on with a lesson, but maybe they ask students for their feedback about the lesson, or maybe somebody that uses unconventional techniques for teaching, not just a traditional lesson plan, something like that. Yeah, that's something I think it makes a very effective teacher.
I think a good teacher or a great teacher is a teacher with a good support network. I've been saying a lot about engagement and activity. The truth is, if I was in a teacher's shoe, it would be really hard to like care and give it your all and your most peppy face and attitude when you're doing your job, when it's like kind of dead end. You have to pay for materials yourself. You have no support. Your job follows you home. You're doing a lot of things outside of your actual workplace. I really do understand what it is that makes a lot of teachers kind of boring or even unlikable, to be honest. Is like a lack of support, a lack of really giving them the resources that they need to actually do what they have to do. And so a lot of our classes are spent with the bare minimum. You read the textbook, you turn in the homework, you leave. I think teachers themselves would actually like to have a class that's more engaging, more fun and enjoyable for everyone. It's just that a lot of them don't really have the resources that they need to take it to that next level. So they just have to give us like whatever is like left over, really. And obviously that's something that's a little bit more above the teacher. That's more like district level, man, administration level. But I think that would improve classes overall.
Well, with that, I think this has been a great, great conversation, a great event. And so I guess I can ask the panelists for a short closing remarks to any information that you want to leave these great people with as they go and engage in the school year, any advice or anything that you will leave them with before we close out this event.
I just want to say thank you all for coming to listen to this panel discussion. I just want to say that for all you who work in schools or do any work with children, just listen and just talk to them. That's one of the most effective things you can do. Just take time, ask them how their day was, and just talk to them.
Yes, thank you for coming and listening to us today. One thing I'll leave everyone with is have empathy and patience for your students next year, and engage in your classroom's presence and value in real world learning, and just enjoy the year while it lasts.
If I can add in really quick for the new school year, please, 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 please don't continue to adopt outdated habits. As you go into the school year as an instructor, as a school administrator, or whatever type of faculty member you are, please come in with an open head. Please hear your students out. Please hear ideas that support them and that eventually will support you. So please just go in with a clear line and an open head about things that can possibly change to make it better for everyone involved in that classroom setting. Please.
100%. Thank you for having us. I enjoyed speaking and sharing all my thoughts. One thing to leave you guys with is just think outside the box. We will never go back to how things were before COVID. Things are just like different fundamentally now, and we can't go back. And so we should approach the new school year with that in mind, just that things are going to be different. New unpredictable situations are going to happen every day, almost probably. And it's just good to approach that with a mindset of being able to be flexible and adapt.
All right, I guess I'll go ahead and kick it to Lindsay and she'll wrap it up.
Thanks so much, Lamont. Just a couple of housekeeping things to close us out. Once again, my name is Lindsay Barrett. I'm with the Skillman Foundation as a Program and Impact Fellow. And of course, first, I want to thank our moderator, Lamont, and our panelists, Mosammad, Willyne, and Mathias, who are all truly phenomenal today. And as Mathias mentioned, they're all members of the Skillman Foundation's President's Youth Council, which we launched in 2020. And it meets regularly with the foundation leadership to discuss issues that are important to these council members and advise on how the foundation can better support their needs and aspirations. And for our new faces today, or those of you who may be unfamiliar with the Skillman Foundation, we're a children's philanthropy that helps Detroit youth reach their highest aspirations, and we focus on strengthening K-12 education, after-school learning opportunities, and college and career pathways here in Detroit. And you can learn more about the foundation, more about the President's Youth Council, and our upcoming Let's Talk events at the Skillman, at skillman.org. And you can also follow us on all of our social media platforms, which I believe Natalie will be dropping in the chat for you as well. And a recording of today's conversation will also be found on the foundation's website. And I just want to close out by saying that as a former classroom teacher and educator, I feel energized by the conversation today and a very deep, deep sense of gratitude to our panelists for showing up and sharing their truth and their stories, and your passion and commitment to this conversation around how we reimagine school going into this school year and beyond. And I feel hopeful that this conversation will continue as you've made a call and a charge to all of us to continue with young people so that we can respond to that call to action. And with that, I will close us out here. And once again, thank you to all of our panelists, and thanks to all of the participants for an engaging conversation today.